by Sean McFadden, who will introduce his new course on the philosophy of power, or to use his title, the dynamics of power, to us. Sean last year taught a course on the philosophy of the machine based on a book that he's written, and this year he has prepared over almost, I think, 8 months of work, the philosophy of power course. And he's done all the recordings, everything's done, and we're very excited to have the course start in, well, what is it? A month from now, I think 5 weeks from now. We'll talk about the details in a bit. I'm going to bring Sean in now. Hello, Sean.
Hey, Johannes. Good to be with you.
Good to see you. Sean, feel free to introduce yourself, your many hats that you wear, and also why or what brought you to this course, to this topic of power.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. My name is Sean McFadden. I am by training a physicist and a neuroengineer. So I've got a degree in physics, a degree in neuroengineering, but I dabbled in a lot of other things. I worked on complexity mathematics at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, and also on the philosophy of AI, the philosophy of technology, in Cambridge at the Center for Future of Intelligence. I also worked some at algorithms pertaining to personality at the Psychometric Center in Cambridge as well. And especially when I had a lot of time on my hands during COVID, I got deeper into philosophy of technology, and have since then continued and entered into the spheres of power, researching power, which kind of kicked off from my last topic, namely the machine, philosophy of technics,
Yeah.
where I also focused on the ideology of the machine, and I focused on ideologies, political ideologies. And that's kind of been the starting point from which I branched out and went deeper into power, into the notions of power.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So maybe you could begin just by describing to us, for us, the first two lectures that you will be focusing on. Which thinkers and which books?
Of course. So the first two start off with a more, you could say, holistic or more complete understanding of power as a historical phenomenon, as a historical essence that is, difficult to grasp, difficult to describe, which is why we start really at the foundations of which any good philosophy has to begin, and that is the ancients. So we start off specifically, of course, with Plato and with Aristotle, both of which have also been very political thinkers. Of course, the most famous work by Plato arguably is the Politeia, the Republic. And also, we've got Politics by Aristotle, and you've got the essential structural descriptions of various forms of government, their perfect forms, their lower forms. You've got the rule of the many, the rule of the few, the rule of one. And on top of that, you've got a dynamical description of how one transitions into the other. And that is, in that case, relevant, especially when it comes to historical analysis, because it almost gives you, which is why it's called the dynamics of power, it gives you a dynamical argument, a dynamical picture of how power unfolds and develops throughout history and in long cycles, which I find very impressive and barely done in such depth. Goes to show how relevant the ancients remain to this day.
Excellent. Yeah.
And the second one, of course, then will continue on this cycle into more recent history, but we remain at this holistic historical understanding of power, and we're going into sovereignty, the notions of sovereignty, which have become relevant especially throughout the Enlightenment era and the revolutions. And there we'll be looking at Carl Schmitt as well as Bertrand de Jouvenel. Schmitt is very known. De Jouvenel, some people may know him that are into power, but I think he's a very, very relevant thinker. And really looks at the kind of genealogy of paradigms of power throughout the transitions of sovereignty. For example, going from the divine right of kings, a kind of divine sovereignty, the god king, moving on towards popular sovereignty, the sovereignty of the people, and the sovereignty of law, and the more recent historical developments as opposed to the ancient ones we speak of in the first lecture.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So if you have any questions for Sean on power, absolute power, to quote Palpatine, then you should raise your question in the chat and we'll get to them in the end. I think Sean will be with us for another half hour or so. What I showed you here briefly before was the course curriculum. When you actually enroll, this is what it looks like. So Sean has put together 5 lectures on different topics: the polis, sovereignty, propaganda, power structures, and technocracy. Sean will describe all of these, the rest of them, in a minute. When you look at, for example, the first one here, you can see what this looks like actually. So this is the video lecture, taking a while to buffer because we are streaming live. The audio lecture, the handout, and potentially your comments. So let me just briefly point out what it actually means when you enroll. If you are new to this, the enrollment page is this one here. I'll put the link in the chat in a second. And you find all 5 parts or lectures listed here in detail, what we're going to read: Plato, the Juvenal, Edward Bernays, Foucault, Jacques Ellul, and also the 3 different study tiers that I'll mention not now, but after a bit more from Sean. You also find all live seminar dates. If you have time for the seminars this June, then you should join us beginning Sunday, the 9th of June, 6 to 8 p.m. UK time, 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're meeting 6 times, and at the final seminar, so there's 5 seminars on the lectures, on the thinkers and the books. The final seminar, you can present your own talk. So, yes, Bernays, what text? Well, that's actually where we're going next. So, Sean, floor is yours again.
Sure. So, moving on to the third lecture, we'll be focusing on propaganda, specifically how power has, especially in recent times, grown to invade our minds, so to say, by means of mass media, by means of public management of opinion. Johannes is showing it very correctly. We are going to read Propaganda by Edward Bernays, and also look at the excellent documentary by Adam Curtis titled The Century of the Self that Bernays will feature in. And there we'll be kind of looking at propaganda, looking at this sort of mind control as a transition into the next part of the course, which will be focusing then more into power structures. And what I mean by that is, instead of this holistic historical perspective on power that we look at in the first 2 lectures, we'll be looking at a more reductionist way of looking at power systems, at the multitude of systems that make up power. Rather than the whole of power as a complete entity, we're going to look at the various interplay of systems. We're kind of taking it apart into its puzzle pieces and looking at the interplay of various social systems and power as a social medium, as described by Niklas Luhmann, for example, but also then deeper understood by Michel Foucault, to then basically put it back together to gain a more complete understanding, to put it back together into a whole that is more than the sum of its parts. And in this sense, I realized when reading Foucault and Luhmann that Luhmann is a very, very good angle, or the basis of Luhmannian social systems theory is a very good basis and angle to understand Foucault and to understand Foucault's notion of power. And that is something I've rarely seen come together. I've rarely seen people combine Foucault and Luhmann, but I think it's one of the most fruitful things in that particular aspect of power that I've come across, and that's why we'll be focusing on that in lecture 4.
Can you say more, please, on that angle?
Yeah, for sure. So Luhmann developed something called systems theory. It was meant to be a kind of a general systems theory, and he has some basic definitions and principles there. And one should always remember that it is a reductionist theory. It is not holistic. You use it to engage in a scientific study of a particular system, but you should not attach yourself to that particular analysis. Always remember, it is always one particular reduction you're doing. And so, a general systems theory can look at different systems: biological, cognitive, social. In this case, it's going to focus on social systems and power as a medium of social systems. So, power as something that resolves various possibilities within a social system, various possibilities of reward and sanction, for example. And if you look at his specific avenue that he takes when looking at reward and sanction, that basically seamlessly connects to Foucault's notion of discipline and punish, and Foucault's notion of power in the subjective sense, the double meaning of the subject, right? The the subject as the ego, but also the subject as the subject of power. Um, and also what he calls governmentality, which is the transition. Foucault basically says that sovereignty has transitioned into a systems theory of power. We no longer have a sovereign authority, but we have governmentality. We have a system science of population control. And that is where the synthesis of Luhmann and of Foucault becomes so fruitful.
Excellent. I think we have a question here from Susan that fits well right now, so I'll pull it up now. If you have questions for Sean, put them in the chat and we'll get to them. Susan asks, will the course touch on advances in technology and power?
Well, yes, of course. So we're kind of building up to it. So the aspect of technology, the interplay of technology and power, comes at the 5th lecture, which is, you could say, the climax, where we have essentially thus far looked at power in a holistic historical sense. Then we've kind of taken it apart and looked at its constituent parts, its constituent structures, the interplay of its components, and are now putting it back together and have a more complete picture from the inside and the outside when looking at technocracy. And there I'll be focusing most specifically on Jacques Ellul. Jacques Ellul, who was personally an interesting character, but also a brilliant mind when it came to a critique of technology, but also a critique of technology from a lens of power and politics. And there specifically, we'll be looking at the Political Illusion, a brilliant work by Jacques Ellul. And we'll be looking at specifically that work because it ties together everything we speak of until then. We will have the groundwork that allows us to understand the political illusion on a much more deeper level. Because he will be touching upon notions of sovereignty. He'll be touching upon ideas from Carl Schmitt. He'll be looking at systems theories. He'll be touching upon Foucauldian ideas. All of this will come together in Ellul. And having gone through the preceding lectures, it will be way more in depth that we can explore Ellul's ideas when coming to the political illusion.
Great, thank you very much. Feel free, by the way, to come back to any of your lectures and speak in a bit more detail. I'll just mention a few things on our friend Edward Bernays. First published in 1928, as far as I know, Bernays actually came up with the word propaganda. I may be wrong about this, but he certainly came up with its reframing after the Second World War. He started referring to it in his organization as public relations. So a PR department is a propaganda department. And Bernays only happens to be the nephew of Sigmund Freud and only happens to be a great uncle of the founder of Netflix. I'm sure there's no connection. But if you look at the first chapter, which is entitled Organizing Chaos, I don't know if that's visible, it ties in perfectly with Plato's cave. Now, here is what Edward Bernays, who taught women to smoke cigars to liberate themselves, for example, and to emancipate themselves, for example. And he also taught, I think, if I'm not mistaken, sold cigarettes to people in general because they was deemed healthy. And I think they invented bacon as a healthy American breakfast. So the conscious and intelligent, this is Bernays, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions, doxa, of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. And I should say, it seems that he counts himself amongst those who are the true ruling power. We are governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. So they supply needed ideas. The language is deeply Platonistic. I would, of course, not agree that the so called philosopher kings in Plato are in anywhere near what Bernays here describes, because propaganda for the sake of selling, let's say, bacon is probably quite different from trying to organize a polis to be directed by the idea of the good and not the idea of capital and consumerism. So this is just my 2 cents on propaganda, and the Adam Curtis documentary, which is freely available on YouTube, is excellent. If you have, thank you very much, Susan. I think too that it sounds very interesting, because also I have to say what Sean has put together is there are plenty of courses in academia on power. They will usually just focus on post-structuralism, Deleuze, Guattari, obviously Foucault, and a few others. You rarely read the Jouvenel or Carl Schmitt. Jacques Ellul is rarely taught, as far as I know, and basing it also then, as Sean does, on the ancient wisdom and understanding and seeing how it organically, how power unfolds, how it changes, how it shifts. That is the appeal of the course, and also looking at how today through the media of various technologies, etc., how power there reproduces itself or maintains itself, I think is a unique course. So let me just point out again that enrollment is now open. If you have questions for Sean, feel free to ask them now. I'll mention now what you can choose from in terms of study tiers. If you don't have time for the seminars, you can choose asynchronous study. You learn at your own pace. There's these 5 videos, lectures, and the audio files. You can print out the handouts. You have lifetime access to all course contents. You learn at your own pace. So you do this in a day or you do it in a year. It's up to you. If you'd like to take the seminars, be in a group of peers, the seminars are led by Sean. There will be 6 group seminars in total. They're 2 hours each, but as far as I remember, Sean was very generous with his time. You don't have to be that generous, but uh, I am too. I can't help myself. I just keep going. The Khan seminars at the moment, they're usually almost 3 hours long. So Sean went overtime a bit. You don't have to do this, but 2 hours is already very long. That's just pure discussion. What happens is that Sean will briefly, you come prepared, you've done the reading, you've listened to Sean's lecture. Sean will introduce the topic again briefly and then send you off. Maybe that's up to him. Yeah, I think he was very spontaneous in your seminars last year. So maybe you just have an open discussion at the beginning, then maybe a breakout session, which means that you you break out into smaller groups, so you get to meet everyone else, and obviously also at the end you're supposed to give a talk or present a poem or read a short story you've written or whatever you've done with the material. That's the final seminar. So we're helping you if you want to learn how to write academic papers or essays. Sean can help you. He just recently finished his master of science. Is that correct?
It is, yeah.
With a 1.0, yeah.
Yeah.
So with the absolute best mark you can get in Germany, at the LMU, which is a very good university, an A plus, I guess. And if there are only two left here of this one, if you want, in addition, private tutorials with Sean, so in addition to the 6 group seminars, if for some, maybe you're working on a project, maybe you're setting up your own Substack or something, if there's anything you think that Sean can help you with, or even just more time spent with him, given his very broad knowledge and understanding of various fields, spanning from theoretical physics to neurology, I'll just say neuroscience, to AI, to technology, philosophy, mysticism, etc., then perhaps the philosophical dialogues are also interesting for you. This would be in addition, and this would usually be during the week for 60 to 90 minutes each. These sessions should be long, just about that. And if you want, you can also choose the payment plan here. So, Sean, if there's anything you'd like to add now, speak up.
Yeah. So I really invite people to join the live sessions. There's really some enormous benefit to engaging in discussions together, because specifically when it comes to power, we have to remember it is in a sense a contradictory concept. You look at history, and whatever served power may be the exact opposite of what it was a few years before that. It is a contradictory concept that we grasp, that we get to the core of in dialogue, that we get to the core of in synthesizing various perspectives. And that's exactly why it's not an exact science. That is exactly why it's not, why you can't just derive the principles of power on the board and then just become the most powerful person in the world, right? It's something that we engage with, and it's something that is brought forward, especially in these discussions. So I definitely invite you, if you can, to join the live sessions. And as you put it very well, the Brené's is going to be the center part. It's going to be the middle lecture, so to say. There's going to be 2 lectures preceding it, 2 lectures after it, and there's a reason for that. It does really transition you from the first half to the second half, as you mentioned very correctly, that the intelligent management and this whole idea of this faceless elite, the intelligent management of a faceless elite, that is kind of where the second lecture leaves off. That's where de Jouvenel leaves off. It is this end of traditional sovereignty and the beginning of management, of governmentality, as we get to later on with Foucault. So they're built up in a way that they kind of seamlessly weave into each other and climax in a complete, holistic interior and exterior understanding of power, in such a way that I haven't seen anywhere else. As you've mentioned, some of these authors you don't really get when you study power, which baffles me, because most of them, I would say, are essential. Especially in today's technologized age, Jacques Ellul should always be studied, in my opinion.
Excellent, thank you. So here is Nicholas, who just said Adam Curtis very thought provoking, really enjoyed Century of the Self. Yes, so you may have heard we that will be part of the Bernays uh, seminar to watch the Century of the Self, at least the first episode. And Nicholas asks, will the readings consist of partial selections from each text or whole works or both?
So essentially, what I'll be requiring to read, or what I'll be asking to read for the next seminar, are going to be selections, are going to be excerpts of the texts. Uh, though I would say some of them are definitely readable in their entirety within a week. For example, Propaganda by Bernays shouldn't be too long. Also, Political Theology by Schmidt is not that long, though it is a heavy read, I'd say. But it's also not that long by the pure amount of pages. So it depends. Like anyone who's more ambitious can read as much as they like, of course.
Okay, great. So if there are more questions for Sean, let us know now, please. Sean, feel free to maybe summarize the course again and speak in a bit more detail on any topic that you think is worth discussing now. Thank you, Nicholas, by the way, for the question.
Yeah. So one thing I noticed as well, especially when trying to look at political theory or discussions of power online, is that you, especially with our mass media today, you have like a increasingly intransparent, opaque jungle of niche ideologies, niche political ideologies that all end up fighting each other or purity spiraling and splitting up, that all have their own like private idea of what power is. You ask someone uh, that is socialist, for example, and they'll tell you it's capital. You ask someone of another ideology, they'll say it's the state. You ask someone, and it's usually ideological fragments that give you like a partial picture that doesn't really explain anything for you and doesn't really resolve any bigger issues or bigger questions, and it just kind of leaves you in a hamster wheel of continuous debate and discussion and like simulated online warfare, so to say, right? And that is also one of the motivations why I would urge people to study power more deeply, to study the dynamics of power, as I like to call it. As I would say, even the ancients, even Plato, made, in a sense, a dynamical argument. So I may be biased here from my physics background and my studies in like complex systems and thermodynamics, but I argue that he basically makes a dynamical argument, a kind of a natural law of government throughout history, that there's long oscillations and cycles that take place over centuries, maybe millennia. And these are things that are still relevant today. These are aspects of history you can recognize throughout the ages, which just keeps confirming how relevant the ancients are to many areas, but also specifically power. And these are things that once you understand them, you break free from this cave, this Platonic cave, as you mentioned earlier, of shadows, which are various ideologies that want to sell to you a particular powerful enemy or less powerful enemy that you're supposed to combat and fight and supposed to be against or understand in a particular way, but none of them actually have proper understanding. And that's essentially the mission of this course, is to break out of this, is to get to the core, and to the what de Jouvenel would call the mysterious continued essence, the mysterious continued essence of power that remains regardless of the form the government takes, regardless of whether you take a certain regime, a autocratic regime, a democratic regime. There is a continued essence of power that can take on any ideology, that can rule in the same way or according to similar dynamics, regardless of what political formula, what ideology it's preaching. And I think that is especially important to understand. There is a kind of a teaching, a study, a strategy that has been employed throughout the ages that's that's not commonly known, that we are trying to and trying to get to the core of, and that I'm unveiling throughout the lectures of this course.
Thank you. Here's a question. I don't know what the Macy group is, but is cybernetics discussed in the course?
Cybernetics will be discussed indirectly when looking at social systems theory, and then kind of the transition from the fourth into the fifth lecture, going from uh, Luhmann and Foucault, from social systems theory, complex systems, to technocracy, to Ellul. We're going to be looking at power and the feedback loops between power and technology and mass media. Of course, some of that is also relevant for propaganda for the third lecture. But we will not be specifically focusing on Norbert Wiener or cybernetic principles.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So let us know if you have more questions. Sean, feel free to focus in maybe in on one more topic that you think is important to mention before we wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, another topic that is relevant to look at is, which is why I brought de Jouvenel and Carl Schmitt together, is there's something essential they are looking at, and I just mentioned the mysterious continued essence, and Schmitt mirrors that when he speaks of political theology. Because what is political theology? It's essentially a secularization. He's speaking of a secularization and making imminent of divine and transcendental institutions, right? So historically, if you look at it, a lot of kings, archaic kings, would have ruled for the duration of one particular uprising or war or conquering campaign, and once they were gone, their empire would fall apart. You have many such examples. You've got Alexander the Great then falling apart into three and then more empires, and you've got Genghis Khan. You've got various such examples, but then you have these institutions, the institution of the monarch, the institution of the king, that was maintained through these divine categories. That's where you get the first, you could say, instance of divine sovereignty. You get the idea of the king ruling. The king could die and the new king could come in, but that rule somehow continues throughout the lifetimes of both, and throughout multiple, perhaps multiple lifetimes. And you have that in old versions where they're intimately intertwined. You've got the pharaohs of ancient Egypt being direct representations or incarnations of the sun god. But later on, you also got the divine right of kings. And that is kind of the parallel that de Jouvenel has with Carl Schmitt, is that when you come into more recent times, you got a secularization of divine institutions, and you realize that this continued essence keeps sustaining itself regardless of how much of a separation of powers we bring about, how much of a democratization of powers we bring about. What remains is that the state remains a quasi divine entity, a quasi divine entity that is abstract and uh, almost acts as a transcendental entity for people, that keeps them in check in a similar way that a divinity, a divine entity would, but also in a more intense way, as it's turning from a religion into a science of control, from you could say a cult of authority towards a science of control. That is the right way of putting it.
Excellent. So, as there are no more questions for you, you have the last word before you have to leave and before I go over the enrollment details again. So feel free to say whatever you wish in
Yeah,
departing.
yeah, for sure. So invite everyone to join me on this course. Like I said, I haven't seen others teaching power in the sufficient depth to really understand it at the level that I'm laying out in this course. Uh, I'm happy with whichever way you can join this course, but like I said, the live sessions really bring out the core of certain topics if you can bring together various perspectives uh, in such a contradictory or often seemingly contradictory topic as power. So I invite you to come, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you there and getting to directly engage with you and also learn from you. Right. And yeah, thanks for having me, honest.
Always. Thank you very much, Sean. Okay, let me go over this. So Sean is off now. It disappears into the good night. And as if there are any more questions on the course, specifically just how it works, let me know. I just wanted to make sure that Sean, who has a lot to do, doesn't have to stay for this. So I would like to invite you again. Also, we begin, if you're joining us for the live seminars, on the 9th of June. We're always meeting from 6 to 8 p.m. UK time. That's 7 to 9 p.m. Central European time, or 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time if you are in the US. And you click on the enrollment page, which is in the link to that is in the chat, but it's also, of course, in the description of this video. By the way, if you know anyone who's interested in this topic, let them know and send them the link to this video. You find, so Sean has put together a couple of videos here as well. You find if you scroll all the way down here about a 7-8 minute
Good
video by
afternoon.
Sean where he describes the dynamics of power. You find his biography here. If you take the seminars, which I hope you do, then we're meeting 6 times. You find all seminar dates here. You also find all the 5 lectures described. Who are we reading? Plato and Aristotle, Juvenal and Schmidt, Bernays, so Foucault and Jacques Ellul and Niklas Luhmann. That is here all listed. We will make the readings, at least the excerpts, available to you for educational purposes. If you're a fast reader, feel free to read everything, but there will be focused readings for every week. So, but but the thing is, as you have access to all the video material, of course, indefinitely, then even if you haven't had time to read everything within the 6 weeks, you can always come back to that course, read it again over the summer, come back, listen to the lecture again. You hear something different each time. So if you don't have time for the seminars, which are on Sunday evenings, beginning on the 9th of June, 6 times in total, 6 consecutive Sundays. If you don't have time, then asynchronous study, that's ideal for you. If you do have time for the seminars, at least 3, I would say, then join the Philosophical Fellowship. There's this one. You also could choose the payment plan for that. Or if you'd like to spend more time with Sean discussing power, maybe you're working on power in a specific way, maybe you're writing on power, maybe you're writing a play on power, or you're writing a novel that has to do with it, where you think that you could benefit from discussing this in even more depth with Sean, then these dialogues are for you. There are only 2 left of this tier here. So I hope that you can join us. The link to enroll is in the description of this live stream and also in the live chat. If you know anyone interested in power, please let them know. Send them this video. And I shall retire now. I don't see any more questions that are relevant to this course. So thank you all very much for listening. Thank you very much for listening to Sean and I describing this course. And as I said, if you know anyone interested in this topic, forward the link to this video to them. We are beginning in exactly 4 weeks and 2 days. So if you start now if you enroll now, you start the reading now, that gives you almost 5 weeks before we begin. So that should be good. Of course, you can also choose to enroll at a later stage if there are still places available, which they might not be, because I can imagine with this topic that actually fills quite quickly. So once more, click on the link, which takes you to our Teachable partner page. You click on whichever tier is best for you: fellowship, asynchronous study, all the philosophical dialogues. Click on enroll now, and you're in. All the lectures have been uploaded. So that means that you can start listening to Sean now, take notes, and start reading. Everything's listed on the handout that on how to prepare for the first lecture and all the other lectures as well. So we hope to see you inside. I don't see any more questions. So again, thank you very much indeed. I shall retire now. Good night, good day, good morning, wherever you are.